Welcome to the AI Cafe today, and it's my pleasure to announce you the speaker. It's Katherine Quezada-Tavárez, Research Associate of the KU Leuven Centre for IT and IP Law. This is in Belgium, with a talk on best practices to address the legal and ethical implications of AI tech for the security sector. My name is Carmen McWilliams. I'm the Director of Grassroots Arts, and I'm your moderator and cafe manager. And this AI Cafe is part of the European research project AI for Media. As always, please take notice that the session will be recorded. No confidential information shall be shared in this cafe session. In this cafe, the speakers express their personal view and opinions. This is not necessarily the official AI for Media project opinion. And what is this cafe about? It offers live web sessions, and in this cafe, you gain insight into the European AI scene. And as participants, you get the chance to share knowledge and experiences and meet stakeholders from various areas of AI research and application. And we always welcome you, especially the audience also coming today. A lot of people are already there. This is great. And we really look forward for your questions. So if during the presentations you have questions, please send it to us. And I will read it to Katherine after her presentations. And now I shortly introduce our highlight today. So Katherine Quezada-Tavárez is a research associate at the Catholic University Leuven Centre for IT and IP Law. She's part of the CiTiP's cybersecurity law cluster, where she actively participates in EU-funded projects such as H2020, also Horizon 2020, Darlene, addressing the legal, human rights and ethical implications of the development and implementation of emerging technologies in the security sector. Katherine holds a Master of Criminology and Forensic Science from Camilo Jose Cela University and an Advanced Masters in Intellectual Property and ICT Law from Catholic University Leuven. She's a member of the Ibero-American Network of Young Leaders, Connector Ibero-America, and the Women for Cyber community. Her current research interests include privacy, data protection, security, digital forensics, and AI. So this is very impressive, and thank you that you're here. Hello, Katherine.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great, and we're looking forward for your talk. So I will make you now the moderator, and then you can take the floor and also tell us everything what you like. So now I make you the moderator.
And I am gonna share my presentation right now. All right, it should be fine. Perfect. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here and for investing your time, which you could have been using for many other things than being in this talk. But I appreciate you being here, and yeah, just for us to discuss a little bit about these best practices to address the legal and ethical implications of AI technology for the security sector. And specifically, my goal with this talk is to share with you a little bit of the lessons learned while engaging in security research projects funded by the European Commission, specifically in the context of Horizon 2020. For example, like the clearest example is the Darlene project, which is also here on my slide. So I want to start this talk by saying, like, okay, if you have ever watched this series, Sherlock, where we see is a British TV series where you see this very genius detective where he sees everything very quickly and can interpret all the evidence that he finds on the scene, and all the information that is around him. It's just like, it seems like he knows what may have happened in a certain situation without even needing that much information or background or whatever. So like, he can kind of put together a lot of information very quickly in a way that it's hard to understand. How does he even do that? So my point in this with this slide is, imagine that we could give that kind of ability to our law enforcement agencies. Like, imagine that this could be a skill, a standard skill for law enforcement agencies to quickly perceive everything around them and be able to, let's say, draw conclusions from all the information that they can see on their surroundings. That would be great, but there are certain challenges that we have to mitigate, of course, and that is exactly what my talk is about. Because precisely AI technology or AI-driven technology can give us this kind of capabilities. Let's say Sherlock-like capabilities to be able to, perceive everything around us and very quickly draw and take decisions based on that. So here is the agenda for today. First of all, we are going to talk about AI technology for security, and we are going to use very much Darlene, which is my main project at this moment, as a case study throughout the presentation. I will tell you what Darlene is about in a moment, of course. I'm going to say one word about opportunities and risks of AI technology, specifically in the security sector. Though I'm not gonna, let's say, give a lot of information in that part, because that is something that was very well covered by one of my colleagues a couple of months ago in this AI cafe, in a previous cafe. I think it was in March that Donatella Casaburo was here talking also to the audience of AI cafe. So there I'm just gonna show a slide very quickly, but I will refer you to her talk to learn more about that. And then the core of my presentation is actually what are the solutions, what are those best practices, what are the lessons learned while carrying out this research, while engaging in security research in different security projects throughout my, let's say, engagement in this position that I hold here as a research associate in the Center for IT and IP Law that Carmen was mentioning before. So, okay, so let's start a little bit with, AI technology or AI-driven technology for security purposes. And I want to talk about augmented reality, which is a type of technology that Darlene basically is. Now, what we first need to understand what is augmented reality is basically this emerging technology that focuses on integrating virtual objects into the real world in a, let's say, complementary manner. So basically the point is, you see, for example, the person or this woman at the bottom left of the screen, that she has certain information that she can visualize in her real space, kind of, but it's actually virtual information, like what we see in our computers, but she can interact with it in a very dynamic way, and that makes it very interesting for her to, let's say, better understand the data and play a little bit with things that she sees there. But we know some examples in our day-to-day. Probably you know this IKEA app that is there on the bottom right of the slide. Maybe some of you have used it to be able to see how certain furniture would look in your living room or in your bathroom or your bedroom or whatever. There's also another very popular AR technology nowadays, which is Pokemon Go. Many of us probably have played it, so that's also why I included it here, to make it a little bit more relatable with you. But I'm actually interested in thinking about, okay, how can we use AR or augmented reality powered by artificial intelligence to improve situational awareness, specifically in security situations? And I'm thinking about, for example, law enforcement officers when they are trying to fight crime and terrorism. How can we improve their practices, improve their situational awareness, and give them certain capabilities like the ones that we saw at the beginning with Sherlock, our very famous character from, let's say, these books of Conan Doyle, right? So that's, and that leads me to this part of situational awareness. And that's basically the point of what you are trying to improve through implementing this cutting edge augmented reality technology, because situational awareness is a critical skill in security situations. For example, we know that law enforcement agencies often face high pressure situations where they are forced to make quick decisions. And if we think a little bit about a current example, we know what is going on in Ukraine at this moment, and there, I mean, danger is pretty much around all these police officers or even first responders that are there trying to mitigate the effects after, I don't know, the shelling that happens in many cities. I mean, I don't need to mention Mariupol and all of that because we have heard many stories about it, but we know that they are in the middle of that situation, trying to, let's say, after a certain attack, do their job, find, I don't know, rescue certain survivors of those attacks. And how do you make sure that they can do that in a way that they don't put their own lives at risk? I mean, of course, in security situations, the practitioners themselves are always putting their lives at risk. But there are certain environments, certain circumstances, like what is going on in Ukraine now, that we can think that it's especially true for those instances. So that's exactly where we could use certain technology, like, for example, augmented reality tools, to make sure that the information is not neglected or delivered too late. In situations like what I described a moment ago, and also where they can make real rapid scene analysis in a way in situations where time is of the essence. Though I must say, I'm talking about law enforcement practitioners here, but I think we would all agree that the guy in the picture can also use a little bit of situational awareness here. But okay, let's continue with the presentation. So yes, so the Darlene technology is basically cutting edge augmented reality tools, which are based on artificial intelligence or powered by artificial intelligence to enhance situational awareness with improved optical capabilities, timely reception of crucial information, and constant communications with teams. Because sometimes also what happens, for example, in the Ukraine example that I was given a moment ago, is imagine these first responders that arrive at the scene and are trying to, I don't know, remove the debris that is there and try to find, let's say, rescue victims or find who needs immediate assistance, for example. They also need to continuously interact with people that are on premises, let's say on the command and control center, coordinating all the activities of all the different staff members that are on the field. So that's very important, and that's basically the core of the Darlene technology, to provide certain situational awareness to end users, such that they can stay one step ahead of adversaries in the broad sense. And there are two use cases being, let's say, used in this project. Basically, there is the rapid visual scene analysis for anomaly detection. And that, for example, would be the case when you have, I don't know, you are in the middle of this airport, like is the case here on the slide, that there are certain, you have both you have the citizens, there's an attack ongoing, and basically you can detect who is a person that is carrying a weapon and is about to attack certain individuals on the scene, but also be able to see, for example, when there are objects that are left behind, which can bring the risk for certain explosives, for example, and that could give rise to terrorist attacks. So that's something that they could quickly see, our end users, what is the situation, to interpret a lot of data that is coming to them in real time. This technology can help them, process everything very quickly and understand what is going on. And then the second use case is the tactical neutralization of human adversaries in the presence of friendlies. And this is basically where you have both, well, I think it's clear, right? You have, let's say, citizens that are the victims of this bad guys that are carrying their attacks, but you want to save the victim without harming the citizen that is being attacked, and that's basically what the technology tries to do, even to provide the end users with the possibility to see behind walls to a certain extent, to be able to mitigate these situations, these complicated situations. Now, I said that, of course, we need to think about AI technology and its opportunities. That's something that we have seen a little bit with the use cases of Darlene, and also that we see with much of the technology that is produced nowadays throughout the world. Specifically, I'm thinking about the security technology that is being created under Horizon 2020 projects, for example. And there are many opportunities, but at the same time, there are many challenges. And that's something that my colleague, Donatella Casaburo, was discussing here, using predictive policing as a case study. So I am not going to stop on this slide that much. I would refer you to that other AI Cafe somewhere at the beginning of March, where you can see much more discussion about this. Although if you have any questions about this point, of course, I would be happy to, let's say, elaborate during the Q&A. But what I'm interested in specifically is about this approach towards more legally and ethically sound AI technology for security purposes. And this is where I want to share a little bit what we have identified as good practices as during these security research projects where I have been involved myself, and I have been collaborating with many partners. So let's start with policy and regulation and guidance. Okay, I will try to do in each of these aspects that I'm gonna discuss. What I'm gonna try to do is first give a little bit some impressions or an example of what are the limitations of the technology and the real risks, but also later on to see how we have tried to approach them in these projects. So, for example, we have here AI evidence is one of the, of course, the AI evidence is not the technology itself, but we are talking about certain forensic tools that can produce AI evidence, which are put at the hands of law enforcement practitioners or practitioners in the security sector specifically. Now, something that we have identified during our research, a research that I engaged in with certain colleagues at this CiTiP, is that, okay, there are many questions that are raised when you talk about this technologies. You analyze them from a fair trial point of view. You try to apply the fair trial guarantees and all the principles that are in our human rights instruments. So, for example, some questions that arise is, okay, what's the evidentiary value of the product of those AI technologies, those forensic tools that are based on AI, towards, I don't know, presenting it in court in front of the judge, for example. But also, what are the possibilities for, let's say, a defendant to challenge that evidence that is presented against them? So there are many questions that arise there which are related to algorithmic challenges, like, for example, the black box problem that many of you may be aware of, but also there are other issues related to the algorithmic bias, which is also a topic that many people discuss a lot. There's a lot of research ongoing at this moment. So okay, we come up with this problem. So what can we do about it? Because that's basically the question, or the main question, that I want to address throughout this presentation, is the approach or the overall strategies that we have tried to apply in these security projects. Is to here is like I try to summarize it into bullet points. So you start with extensive analysis of the ethical and legal frameworks, of course, because we are talking about very complex issues that we first need to see what are the rules that apply, what are the frameworks that are relevant. And for example, in our security projects, we typically have to engage in very detailed discussions about human rights, but also data protection. Of course, privacy is a big issue as well. Criminal procedure, specifically, because if you are putting these technologies at the disposal of law enforcement practitioners, you do need to check, let's say, that they are not going to produce something that in the end is not going to be useful in front of court. So that's why you have to take into account criminal procedure rules. Also, we think about surveillance issues. We discuss about evidence sharing matters, and trustworthy AI is a big topic for discussion in our research. And that's a topic, of course, that many of us have heard a lot in recent, let's say, years, but specifically, mostly during the last year, the research and the discussions, the policy development as well have been going, let's say, crazy a little bit. So yes, and besides, of course, you start with that analysis of what is the legal framework, what is it that applies, what are the rules, what is relevant here. And then what we try to do is to develop these guidelines and strategies for the system development and also the implementation, because it's not enough to develop, let's say, guidance for the developers of the tools, but something that we have realized as well in our research as we have moved forward with these projects is that you also need to take into account end users, and that's something that I'm going to highlight later on with one of the upcoming slides. Then, of course, we conduct a very extensive ethical and data protection impact assessments during these projects. Lately, we have also been engaging into societal impact assessments, and that can give us, let's say, an overall overview of what are the possible risks that may emerge, and more importantly, what are the mitigation measures? What can we do, especially from the research, from our research project, to make sure that those things don't come into reality, don't become reality. And finally, let's say towards the end of this project, the general approach that we try or that we pursue, it's, let's say, finalized with this policy feedback, because it's very important that all these lessons that we have learned throughout this process that I have described before, that somehow feeds into the policy developments, and policymakers can make use of that. That's, let's say, the overall strategy and how we try to implement and let's say in our security projects from my department where I work at the Center for IT and IP Law, to make sure that we build these technologies in a way that they are legally and ethically sound. Now, towards the other aspects that we are going to discuss, so for example, now we are going to talk about the second overall recommendation, which is responsibility by design. And now I'm going to discuss a little bit how is it that we achieve responsibility by design during this project. So, but first, the technology limitations and the impacts or possible impacts. So this presentation is about augmented reality technology. And here you see an example of, so the compromise, so when these devices are compromised, they could be fed the data that can deceive or mislead the end user. And then you can think about possible malicious uses of these technologies and what can happen there. So here on the slide, you see, this is an example that I took from a Netflix series, which is about specifically augmented reality tools that are used also in security situations, by the way. So this technology you see, for example, on the picture that is available now, this is what the user was looking at through his, in this case, it was augmented reality lenses, not glasses, but in the end, this is, let's say, kind of the same. So, okay, the technology was saying all clear, you can pass, this person was driving his car, let's say. But actually, what was going on in reality is that this is, so what it's surrounded in red here, what is circled in red in the picture, is the car of the person that is using the augmented reality lenses. And then we see that actually it's not all clear as the technology was saying. Actually, there are many cars coming. It's a very dangerous situation for the person to come in at that moment. So, and if we think about it, okay, let's think, for example, going back to the Ukraine situation, we are using these augmented reality glasses. First responders are trying to rely on this technology to be able to detect when there is a threat and what, I mean, how they can act very quickly by a quick interpretation of the scene and everything. But in the end, they are receiving misleading information because the technology has been compromised, right? And that is exactly the kind of threats and risks that we need to think about whenever we are talking about the limitations of these technologies. And what we need to do to mitigate that, well, basically, in our security projects, as I was mentioning a little bit before, we try to steer the technology development and the implementation by deploying different tools. In this case, for example, I'm showing different examples of legal ethical impact assessment tools and societal impact assessment tools. But also, I mean, for example, at the left side of the screen, you see ethical and societal impact assessment tools that have been developed by our colleagues at Trilateral Research. So I should, my greetings for them for developing these very useful tools. So here you can see this kind of tools, risk assessment tools, are applied specifically at the research stage of the project. Now, something that we have realized as well while engaging in security research is that you also need to take into account the end use of the technology, because being able to build in the technology certain principles and values and make sure that the technology works properly, that is not enough. You also need to make sure that end users or at the implementation of the technology, certain measures are taken. And also in the context of security research was this where these other tools that were developed by other colleagues that I have collaborated with as well, these ethical assessment tools and also misuse risk assessment tools specifically applied to AI systems for the law enforcement sector that could be particularly useful for end users, let's say. So, but let's think about, okay, before I was saying it's important to give guidance not only for developers, but also end users. And here you can see an example of the type of guidance that we try to provide in our projects. So when talking about artificial intelligence technology, something that is very important when talking about responsible design is the issue of data audit, because you need to know your data very well. We have probably many of you have heard of this problem of garbage in, garbage out. So if you put in bad data, let's say, into your AI system, the results of that system you can expect to be also garbage, basically. So how do you avoid that? It's by auditing very well the kind of data that you put in your system. But that is not only the only, let's say, recommendation that we try to give within our projects, and also the good practices that we apply. We also need to think about data set documentation, because it's important to also think what can happen, what are the possible consequences when you release data sets. Yes, those are made available, for example, when you are talking about research projects. Typically, there's this open data pilot that we have to participate in. So it's very important to document very well. Here you can see the data sheets for data sets tool that was developed not necessarily within security research, but I think it's very useful for our purposes, for us to, let's say, see what are, let's say you have to provide a lot of information about what was the motivation for the creation of the data set, how is the data set composed, so that way the people that are going to use it later on for the development of their own technologies, for example, they can know what are the use cases, what this is, that this could be applied for, because we also know when engaging specifically in security research that each use case is very different and can have very varied consequences. So that is why these kind of tools are very important to deploy in these projects as well. And here another good practice as well to share with you is in terms of responsible design, is transparent model documentation. So it's not only the data sets that you use and that you create that needs to be registered through this data sheet for data sets, but also the models that are being developed in these projects to be able to, let's say, towards fostering, for example, transparency of the AI more broadly, but in general, towards responsible design, we need to ensure that this we document everything, that all the decisions that are made while developing these models in these systems. And of course, one thing that it's very important, as I said, we don't only need to think about developers, and that's something that we try to remember in our projects, but we also need to think about end users. And here, for example, on the slide, you see this picture where, okay, one of the big frustrations of the AI developers that I have met throughout my career is that, well, in general, you hear a lot of talk about AI being able to do basically everything to change the world in, you know, in the blink of an eye or whatever. But actually, it's much more complex than that. Of course, the technology is very advanced. There's a lot of progress in the technical, from the technical side, but there are also certain limitations again. And one of the things is you see here this AI tool identifying this cats. I think we would all agree that this is a cat, but if you don't, maybe we should discuss this a little bit later, you know, offline. So identifying this cat as a dog, basically. So, and this is related to actually even the challenges for for developing these technologies themselves. It's not easy to make them work properly, and that is something that is very important to communicate to end users as well. And that's also one of the best practices I want to share with you that we have identified during our engagements in this project. So here, for example, you see this is a meeting that was held last week, actually, where we had training activities for end users in the Darlene project. And you see actually this the picture on the right, yes, that's me, where we have this legal and ethical module for end users. And the importance of that legal and ethical module is what we try to achieve there is to show end users, okay, there you have this very powerful tool, but you have to be aware of its limitations. So again, this thing like, okay, this is very technically complex. Also, there are certain rules that you need to take into account whenever you are implementing the system. Another thing that we try to also make them aware of is, okay, there are certain practices whenever you are using this technology that can help you stay within the boundaries of the law or within the boundaries of these ethical frameworks as well that apply to your activities whenever you are using these systems. So again, the goal in this whole approach is to make sure that, okay, we can fight crime and terrorism with using very advanced augmented reality tools, or we can make sure that first responders in Ukraine are able to detect everything and process all the information in their surroundings very quickly and communicate with their teams in the command and control center. But at the same time, we want to make sure that whenever they are deploying these technologies, they are aware of certain things like automation bias and certain risks relating to algorithmic tools that require certain actions from the end users themselves. And that's basically the point of this training module into legal and ethical issues. The third point that I want to discuss is in terms of the lessons learned throughout our research is this need for interdisciplinary work. And basically, when talking about the limitations of the technology, another example that we have is, of course, facial recognition. There could not be a presentation about these topics without facial recognition. And there have been, unfortunately, certain examples of how certain individuals have been wrongfully accused by algorithms. So here you see, this is all, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, these are examples taken from the US. But of course, this very much relates to these limitations of the technology, to the technical complexity of these systems. And these are all things that we need to take into account while developing this technology, when implementing it into our practices, and specifically for security purposes. And another thing that it's important to take into account, and that we have been become aware throughout our research, is that I mean, of course, you can say, well, if somebody is wrongfully convicted, there is the procedures that they can follow later on to appeal those decisions or whatever. But something that on this video that I am putting here on the slide, actually the link is also on the slide as well for anyone that is interested in seeing what is it that in a very funny way this program tries to show a little bit these issues, is that actually it's not that easy once you have been tagged as a possible suspect, or you have been introduced, let's say, into the criminal justice system, it's not that easy to get out, basically. So that's why whenever we are in high stakes situations like fighting crime, fighting terrorism, it's important to make sure that these potential risks, like in this case, fair trial rights that are being, in this context, I'm talking about the presumption of innocence specifically, that is being violated because of the way the technology works, the possible consequences. We need to think about all of that and make sure that we implement all the safeguards, all the guardrails, and that we make sure that things work properly such that it doesn't come into play. And the way that we try to do this in security projects is basically we apply a multi-pronged approach where we engage different people from different expertise. So of course you have the legal and ethical expertise, which is more the kind of work that I do there. And basically we try to, you see this roadmap basically where we map the legal and ethical principles that apply. We map the frameworks, then we distill certain principles that apply, we provide guidance, and then we come up with a very concrete list of requirements that we later on discuss with our technical partners, but also with our end users, in a way that we try, basically what we try to do is to turn or translate the high level principles that we find in the frameworks, general frameworks that apply. We try to turn them into very concrete requirements or system specifications, which is something, a term that for technical people in the room might ring a bell. Because of course it's very easy to say, let's achieve trustworthy AI or something like that. But when you try to apply it into practice, that's a little bit more complex. And what we try to do is to mix different expertise in these projects and come up with something with very concrete requirements that need to be achieved and implemented into the technology. And then besides the analysis that we do, or the part that we try to do more from the legal and ethical side, a way that we try to, let's say, engage with different stakeholders is by, deploying different techniques. So for example, here you see an example of a workshop where we were basically discussing the initial results of our analysis of those initially identified requirements that we, that we extracted from the frameworks, the frameworks that apply to this specific project that I'm discussing. And basically we raised certain questions, and also we discussed with our technical partners, but also end users were very much engaged with us in that conversation, trying to identify the principles and what is the best way for us to achieve what those principles purport, let's say, or try to achieve in the end in the overall operation of the system. And of course, in these very rich interdisciplinary conversations, that are certain collateral effects sometimes. So something that I'm very proud of actually is that recently there was this work that we, let's say, developed in the context of this project. I'm talking about our data augmentation technique relating to, let's say, mitigating the risk of bias. Bias is a big issue when in terms of algorithmic technology. And during this interdisciplinary work that we have been doing, we came across, we started engaging with technical partners, and we realized, well, maybe there's something that we could do about it. And then we came up together with this data augmentation technique to mitigate data bias issues. Of course, data bias is just one of the type of biases that can get into AI technology, but you have to start somewhere, of course. And this was recently, this work was recently accepted by a huge, if not, for me, one of the biggest AI ethics conferences in the world, which is the ACM Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference. So that's part of the consequences that can come from this interdisciplinary work. And I see that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to quickly cover the ongoing law and ethics monitoring part, which is something also that we try to do in our project. So here you see, again, this example of technical limitations and possible impacts, where we see a technology, a computer vision technology that was identifying thermometer. What we see here is a thermometer. On the left hand side, we see, okay, it's identifying that this black person or dark-skinned person is carrying a gun. It's labeling this tool that is carrying the person as a gun. And then on the right hand side, when it's, let's say, a white hand that is the computer vision is seeing, it's basically labeling the tool that the person is holding as a monocular. So it's still inaccurate, the classification that is doing, but the classification is, let's say, harmless. It's classifying it as a harmless object. So you see here how these biases can get into our technologies in unexpected ways sometimes, and why it's important to engage in these legal and ethical activities. And that's why something that we try to do in our project. So here, the point of this slide is we have different kind of technologies that have caused certain issues or cases that I try to bring here to the fore. And the common aspect between them was that basically there were some issues with their impact assessments. And that's something that we try to mitigate already at the design stage or during our research projects by engaging in a holistic approach into impact assessments, where we conduct ethical impact assessments, but also data protection impact assessments and societal impact assessments, to make sure that we have like the most comprehensive picture of all the possible risks and the mitigation measures that need to be into the design of the technology as well. And finally, one of the recommendations or best practices or lessons learned from this research, the security research projects, is the need to diversify teams. And basically, here you can see that there are certain limitations of technology and possible impacts that are not necessarily unique to AI. So for example, we see on the left-hand side the crash test dummies that were actually working, let's say, or were designed in a way as if it was male, let's say, and that's very much based on who is the person that is developing these technologies. And the problem with this is, so here we see also the soap dispenser example, which is widely known as well, is the soap dispenser that suddenly was not working for, let's say, darker skinned staff members at this organization. And the point was that nobody basically ever tested the technology into more darker skinned persons. And we can think about the broader consequences of that. What are the possible impacts, and why do we need to apply mitigation measures, and the importance of this work? And all of this is summarized into this whole sentence that I copied here from Ben Green, but I'm not gonna read it for you because we are running out of time. But basically the point is, we are working, like the security sector is a very male-dominated industry. Though I hope that is changed. I mean, I think, or I have the feeling that it's slightly changing little by little, and that we need to do more efforts into improving the diversity of the teams, such that we are able to fight certain things. So for example, if you are developing a soap dispenser, or in this case, we saw the example of crash test dummies. If you are developing this kind of objects or technology or innovation, if you don't take all the perspectives into account, then possible consequences are going to come for the people that are not on the table. And here you see, again, I put the picture of this meeting that we had in Darlene last week in Munich, because you see that actually there are certain ladies, and I'm very, let's say, proud as well of seeing more female involvement in this project, because let's say that all this diversity, all the different opinions need to be taken into account to make sure that we tackle all the possible issues that can come to the fore whenever we are developing this tool and implementing them into practice. So that was basically it. I know it was, let's say, a lot of information. I put here some references for further reading, also the kind of, let's say, bibliography that I use for the preparation of this presentation. And that was basically it. I hope it was useful for you, that you have found some of this that you can implement, for example, during your own projects, even though they are not security projects. And yeah, again, as I said at the beginning, thank you so much for being here and for spending your time in this presentation with me, with Carmen, in this AI cafe, instead of being anywhere else having fun or whatever, enjoying the sun, for example, if you are here in Belgium. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katherine. This is a very exciting presentation. And yes, I also thank you that you spent your time with us. You could do many other things. So, yes, I have a question. I will start with my question. And again, everybody who's listening today, please also send us your questions. I will read them. I try to read them, Katherine. And so until 4 o'clock, we have a Q&A session. First, to Michael out there, who was writing a lot of comments, there is Katherine's email, because Michael was asking if after the cafe, of course, he may write you an email or discuss with you more. So I think here is the email. So, yes, now the question: how do you think that security researchers can contribute to policy efforts into trustworthy AI?
Yes, so that's a very good question. Thank you so much for that, Carmen. I think that basically what I try to defend throughout this presentation is the kind of approaches that we can develop, the kind of things that we can do in these projects, but not only the kind of research that you can do, but also an important part towards the end of your research when you are wrapping things up, is to put all the lessons learned into, I don't know, certain kind of policy document or write policy briefings, for example, that you can provide to the European Commission and or any other kind of policy makers into showing them how you have been trying to engage in this trustworthy AI. What is it that you have been trying to do? Because I'm aware that it's not only in the projects that I have been highlighting here throughout the presentation that there have been or there are many efforts towards engaging in trustworthy AI and achieving this very, let's say, big goal or challenging goal of trustworthy AI in our research, in our activities. It's not only in security projects that are many efforts into that. So it's important to engage with policymakers. Something that we do is not only the policy briefs or foreseeing a specific deliverable for policy feedback, but also is, for example, if there is, when there came the AI proposal last year, something that we did is come together a couple of researchers and provide feedback to the European Commission as well into, okay, what do we think about this text? What can be improved? What are the things, I mean, based on the research that we are conducting and the kind of lessons that we have learned throughout our activities, project activities. And something else is as well is trying to engage in certain activities where you know that there are going to be policymakers as well involved. So, for example, there is this CiTiP community for security research, where you find not only end users and security researchers, but also there are many people from the policy making side as well that are engaging in different conversations, panels, discussions, and meetings. But also we have, I don't know, for example, if there is an activity by the European Commission where you can engage as well, it's important to be there and put your research, your knowledge, your expertise on the table, such that not only this kind of lessons learned are useful for you, but also for other people in the community, and in the end also for policymakers whenever they are doing their job and carrying out their activities. So that I said a couple of things. I don't know if any of that made sense or even answered your question at all, but is the way I see it, because it's also how we have tried to do it during our projects as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Great answer. I'm totally informed now. Here comes the next from Joao. I hope I say the first name right. How do you think that AI regulations should evolve in terms of legal, but also standards for the security sector?
Yes, that's also a very good question, João. So thank you very, very much for that. Actually, there is a lot of development these days, also in terms of standardization activities as well. So there's a lot of policy making, not only the AI regulation that was proposed last year, but also there are many activities in other environments. So I'm thinking specifically also about the Council of Europe work in this sense. But in terms of security more specifically, I think it's important that the policy initiatives also take into account very concretely the characteristics of the security sector that are not necessarily the same as the more broader AI applications. So you need to take into account the specificities of security practices, of how security practitioners do their jobs. And I think that is a good direction, for example, that we are seeing in the context of the Council of Europe, that has developed not only the general feasibility study in terms of what is the kind of activities, not activities, I mean the rules that need to be developed for AI more broadly, but also there are certain documents. I'm thinking specifically about one that was issued that focused specifically on the security sector. And basically the recommendation, the final recommendation there was, well, actually we need probably rules that are applicable to AI systems or AI technologies that apply in security sector, given the complexities of this sector and the specific practices, etc., etc. And that it's also the same direction in which standardization activities are going as well. There are certain standards that are being developed that are specific to I don't know, law enforcement technology, security technology, etc., etc. And again, it's always about these very complex issues that arise in these contexts that needs specific, let's say, mitigation techniques or specific measures that we need to apply to make sure that we overcome the challenges that are posed by these technologies. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And here comes another question. Thank you, everybody, sending us the questions. From Alexei. Bias in data sets is often not an absolute characteristic. The negative effect of the bias depends on a specific application that a given data set is used for. Did you try to assess bias application cases? Even formalizing this feels not trivial.
Even formalizing? I didn't understand the final part.
Yeah, even formalizing this. To formalize this, did you try to assess bias application cases? And then, as a comment, even formalizing this, it feels not very, feels non-trivial. No?
Yeah. Well, yes, this is a question actually that is very much related to something that I mentioned during my presentation. AI bias, algorithmic bias is one of the big issues that we analyzed during our project and that we took into account. Well, we are taking into account during our research activities. And that is actually because of the auditing of the data specifically that we were using for the specific use cases for the development of the technology. That's where we came up with this, let's say, understanding that the kind of data that we were using would probably produce or very likely produce biased results. And that gave rise to this research that I mentioned that is going to be published in the ACM Fairness, Accountability and Transparency Conference, which is the result of interdisciplinary efforts with technical partners, with people in our project where we have engaged in these activities. And of course, something that because I think when you are talking about the specific use cases that you need to take into account whenever you are using a data set, that it's also another aspect that I discussed during the presentation, and that shows the importance of the data sheets for data set aspects of my research or our research, where we try to basically, okay, when we are releasing data sets, to make sure that people that are going to use them, in the end, they know what are the specific use cases that we have in mind, because yeah, the technology, the results, the consequences that can be very different depending on the specific use cases that you take into account. So yes, definitely that is one of the aspects that we take into account during these overall strategies that we apply in these projects, and that's something I think I try to also show throughout the presentation.
Yes, thank you. I will now a little bit try to summarize what Michael is telling me to basically to comment to, and so I'm trying to summarize. I'm not going to read everything. He says, thanks, I'm an IBMer, and as you may know, trustworthy AI, which you are talking about, was mentioned, is very high on our agenda. And to that extent, we've developed a whole range of open source libraries, which yes. I see redeveloped here.
Yes.
Because whereas it probably would be better, that's not really a question, but a comment, would be better that we can further enhance these libraries rather than reinventing the wheel over and over again.
Yes.
He has, the question is here, I'm jumping now. For this case, IBM has developed AI fact sheets to explain what the model is about and came into existence. And yes. You may know, that's the question, Francesca Rossi from IBM, who was involved in the high expert group on ethical AI. Are you in contact with her?
But those you are raising two different issues. So on the one hand, the comment on the IBM tool set, yes, I'm aware of it, and actually that's something, the kind of the tools that we try to also present to our partners in our guidance. We include a lot of the material that has been produced also in the context of IBM. So thank you so much also for developing those. We are very grateful for that work. But what we try, actually what I try to do during this presentation is to show more specifically the kind of approaches that we try to follow in security research more specifically, because as I have been trying to stress throughout the presentation and also during this Q&A is the kind of issues that may emerge in a security context. So I'm thinking specifically about, for example, law enforcement technology. When you are developing law enforcement technology, the kind of problems that you may encounter, the possible risks of the technology might not in all cases be entirely the same as more general, so for example, augmented reality tools. And that's also the kind of examples I was trying to show, and that is why we thought, or we found it necessary in certain projects to, let's say, make tailor-made tools. When I'm referring to we, I'm referring also to my partners and colleagues that have from other organizations in terms of the other tools that I have shown here. But it's because of that. It's just we think that the security sector has certain particularities that call for very concrete measures and specific tool sets that are able to or can help us address the specific issues that arise here. Now, in terms of who was sitting on the table in the high-level expert group, I think there was a diverse group, though, I mean, I don't know all the members, so I think we will have to check throughout, I don't know, a quick search online or whatever. But I think I know that the concern probably that is on the person that is raising the question at this moment is that probably there were in the trustworthy AI guidelines in this high-level expert group guidance. I have heard a lot of complaints that there probably were more people from industry than there should have been or whatever. I mean, To be honest, it's not up to me, for example, to criticize this or to refer to this kind of work. I think in this kind of presentation, what I was trying to focus more on is, okay, there are certain principles and general, let's say, safeguards that we are taking into account, and there is this general description of trustworthy AI, many trustworthy AI efforts. Maybe trustworthy AI is not the most, is not very popular for everyone, or is not what we all want to achieve necessarily, because we find that other frameworks are probably more comprehensive or over like encompassing more than that. But it's basically what we try to use as a starting point. I think it's always good if we see the kind of principles that are there in the high-level expert group guidance. That's a good starting point as to what are the general principles and goals that you need to keep in mind whenever you develop these technologies to fight the risks, to mitigate the possible issues that may arise. And of course, you can always do better. There are other frameworks that are probably more comprehensive or that have more diverse perspectives, but in the EU specifically, and also throughout the world, I'm aware that those developed by the HLEC or the high-level expert group are widely deployed at this moment. So we try to rely on them because of that, essentially.
Thank you. So, and I think the time is over. It was a great cafe, and therefore I want to close this session. And as Katherine is so nice, she has still her email here posted. So if you want to continue to maybe ask a question, you may send an email. So yes. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was great.
It was great. Bye-bye.